We've now arrived at John's Gospel, chapter 15, and we're looking at that very famous allegory or metaphor of the vine and the branches. John chapter 15, verses 1 to 17. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he trims clean, so that it will be even more fruitful. And you are already clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. And neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. If a man remains in me, and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And if anyone does not remain in me, he's like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. And if you remain in me, and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be given to you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourself to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. And if you obey my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have obeyed my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. And you are my friends, if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a master does know what his servant's business is. How instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. And then the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. This is my command. Love each other. So here we have one of the most powerful metaphors that Jesus has used in his ministry. And it's one which demonstrates to the disciples exactly how it is they can be effective and fruitful in their own ministry. Now, it's very apposite, and it's very significant from the point of view of where we're at in this discussion, because don't forget the situation that we're in. Here we've just had the Last Supper, and here we've had a situation where Jesus has warned his disciples that he is going to leave them, and that where he goes, they cannot follow him. He's going to his death, and they are going to remain and continue the ministry that Jesus has started within them. So, in that context then, in that central theme that I am leaving you, we now have this fundamental problem. How will the ministry continue? What will stop everything from just falling apart once you take out the leader of the group, the band? Very often people round up ringleaders, don't they, in order to dispense with a movement. If the ringleaders go, if the leader goes, then the movement often disappears and dissolves completely. And Jesus has set this up, though, in such a way that that is not to happen. In fact, he's teaching them here that in this context that I am leaving you, but, and this is a very big but you are to remain in me. Can you see how important then the connection is here? This is so that the ministry will continue and the church will be established and grow, despite the fact that I am leaving you, says Jesus. Despite the fact that I'm going, despite the fact that you will not have me here with you, I will be entrusting all of this work to you, and it will grow and flourish, and you will bear much fruit, and there will be many people who are brought to be converted to the message and understand it and accept it and brought back to God, provided one thing only, that you remain in me. So, you might say, well, what does that mean? And here we have the image and the picture. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, and every branch that does bear fruit he trims so that you will be even more fruitful. And just in case you're unsure as to what I mean, I speak very plainly and clearly here. I am the vine, and you are the branches. If a man remains in me, and I in him, he will bear much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing. Now, we've seen throughout John's Gospel that Jesus speaks in metaphors. He uses pictures of things that we understand, in order to convey truths that we would otherwise find difficult to understand. For someone who has come from heaven, who has been with God from the very beginning, and who created the world, and who is inducted into mysteries beyond which we can know nothing, it's absolutely essential that you use metaphors, because we're talking of things that we can't, outside of our understanding. The mind of God is so vast, it cannot be comprehended by the mind of man. You cannot hold the ocean, or the ocean would not be the ocean if you could hold it in a teaspoon. So it's much bigger and vaster, the mind and thoughts of God. The only way in which we can get some grip on it is by looking at analogies for the things that we do understand, and then maybe extrapolate from them to the things which are beyond our normal experience. So, I am the vine and you are the branches. That's the metaphor that we have now. We're very familiar with plants, vines, and vines which are a single plant with lots of different branches. And each of those branches bears fruit, the grapes that come from that, and that's the product which everybody wants from the vine. Now, Jesus is using this picture to say that, well, I am the vine. So the whole thing is united in me, because the vine is a single plant or object. But the disciples are individual branches or leaves. And those individual branches or leaves means that they are bringing forth individual elements of fruit. Some branches bring forth a lot of fruit, some branches bring forth less fruit. But it's all one plant, which means it all has one purpose, one goal, one aim, and it works well provided that the branch remains in the vine. If you take a branch and rip it off the vine, and it may have grapes which look like they'll be growing from it, if you leave it to one side, nothing will happen. It will wither, it will die, and it will only be fit to be thrown away and burned, says Jesus, because you haven't remained in me. So this idea of the connection between the disciples and Jesus has to be maintained, and that in the face of the fact that Jesus is going. Right. That leads us to the $64 question, as they used to say on an American quiz program. How can you remain in Jesus when he is leaving? That seems an insoluble, but we've already been given the answer to that. And the answer is really quite straightforward. And it's been specified in the last chapter and in this chapter. The key feature is, if you love me, says John 14:15, you will obey what I command. John 14:21, whoever has my commands and obeys them, he is the one who loves me. John 14:23, if anyone loves me, he will obey my teaching. Verse 24, he who does not love me will not obey my teaching. And then in chapter 15, where we are, he goes on to explain this. If you obey my commands, you will remain in my love. So you are in no doubt about what it means to remain in Jesus. If you obey my commands, you will remain in my love. You are my friends, he says, verse 14, if you do what I command. So, remaining in Jesus is merely a statement for obeying his teaching, holding on to his words, following what he says. And don't forget, all of this is in the context of an entire society, kingdom, Israel, where the leaders, the religious leaders of the day, claim to provide the very words of God. They pore over the scriptures every day. They understand very little, though. They claim to be guides for the blind, but they are blind guides themselves, says Jesus. They understand next to nothing about the scriptures because they've interpreted it in a legalistic and mechanistic kind of way. They haven't understood the heart and the soul of what the scriptures are really about. And that heart and soul revolves around a single, simple idea of love. A new commandment I give unto you. Love one another as I have loved you. In fact, Jesus goes on to say here that my command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Now that's a very high standard. The standard is set, the bar is so high, it's beyond any commandment of the Old Testament. In the Old Testament and in the early parts of the ministry here, it was reiterated. You should love your neighbour as you love yourself. And that's a certain high standard which we fail to meet anyway. Jesus now raises the bar to an even higher standard, because that higher standard is not love your neighbour as you love yourself, but love each other as I love you. And that's a much, much higher standard. Why is it higher? Because he goes on to say, greater love has no one than this is verse 13, that one laid down his life for his friends. And you are my friends, if you do what I command. So Jesus is saying here that, quite explicitly, the love which I am showing to you is that I lay down my life for you. And that is the example which I'm setting for you to follow. That if you wish to follow me, then you too must show the same kind of love. Love each other. How? As I have loved you. How did I love you? I have laid down my life for you, and you will see that very shortly. That's the nature of this. By doing that, then you remain in me. Okay? So we have then, I am the true vine, my Father is the gardener. So there's the metaphor, there's the picture. The vine unites all the individual disciples who are the branches, each disciple bearing fruit from the vine, but they only do so if they remain in the vine. And that is a picture or a metaphor of obeying Christ's command, holding on to his word, doing as he says rather than as the Pharisees have taught. There's a contrast here. Do as I say, not as the Pharisees do. And if you do that, then you will remain in me. If you don't do it, then you will not remain in me. The gardener, he says, cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he trims clean, so that it will be even more fruitful. The idea of the pruning fork here is something which I suppose could be taken as a picture of chastisement and discipline. Whether we should push it that far I'm not sure, but certainly what he's saying is that if you don't remain in me, the branch will be cut off. If there's no fruit from it, it's only good to be thrown away. Its only purpose is to be burnt. There is no value in it whatsoever. The only value comes from bearing fruit. And the only fruit-bearing branches are those that remain within the plant. And those which are remaining within me and obeying what I command, then the Father will trim them and make sure that they are producing the best fruit. And that trimming is a kind of an interaction with the disciples, which teaches them how to bring forth the right things by the word of God, which is part of the comforter, the counselor who will come. You are already clean because of the words I've spoken to you. This cleaning of the branches is getting rid of any falsehood, therefore, getting rid of any errors and things which are impure or wrong in some respect. The cleaning is getting rid of all the detritus, all the things which cling and would drag us back down and not produce anything fruitful. So holding on to Jesus' words enables us to already be clean. So the idea of cleanliness is part of the truth of what we hold on to. And you're already clean because of the word I've spoken to you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. You can't bear any fruit without me. So if you don't obey my commands, well, you may end up saying that you are connected to God, but you'll end up just like the Pharisees with an empty set of religious practices, purely for ritual, purely observance, purely dead letter of the law, purely become a job's worth in the kingdom of God. Someone who will not understand the root meaning of something, but only practices the outward signs of it. So I'm the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, we will bear much fruit. That's a repetition of what was just said. Apart from me, you can do nothing. That's another underlining and restatement. If you don't remain in me, it's like a branch which is thrown away and withers, and such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire to be burned. So remain in me. And you do so by, and my word will remain in you. Repeat my words, repeat my ideas, repeat the thoughts and the teachings that I've given to you, and that way you will remain in me. Be attuned and alive to see the world through my eyes and act in the way that I would act. And as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you, and that's demonstrated by my death. So remain in my love. And just as I've obeyed my Father's commands, by going to the cross and laying down my life, and I remain in his love. In the same way you will remain in my love by obeying my commands. The love of Christ is contingent here upon the element of obedience, and we shouldn't forget that. If you are completely disobedient and ignoring Christ and have no real love for the person of Christ as such and the kind of character that he represents, then there is no real health here and there is no real connection. And it's not surprising that such branches are stripped away because they don't produce anything. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Only a few hours before, you call me master or teacher, and rightly so, because that is what I am. But now a transition has taken place here. At this point, I no longer call you servants, but I call you friends. And there's an equality, a raising of status here, a moving from one position to another, from a mere disciple to an apostle. A moving from being someone who merely takes instruction to someone who has the authority to give instruction. This transition for these disciples is taking place at this point. I no longer call you servants, because you do not know his master's business, a servant doesn't. But instead I've called you friends. For everything I have learned from my Father I have made known to you. 3 years of ministry, and you have had the perfect teaching and discipleship course from that. Now you understand my purposes, and now you understand the very purposes of God. And you didn't choose me, but I chose you to go and bear fruit that will last. So there is a purpose in your life from now on, in moving from students to masters yourself, from servants to friends. Your job is now laid out for you. Your role is clear. Go and bear fruit that will last. And then the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. And this is my command, love one another. So the task then, as I change from one state to another, from the living, I move to being crucified, killed, dead and buried and resurrected, and then it will leave you. So you are changing status too. And that status means that you must step up into a new role. You must step up to the position of being those who are now taking that teaching and bringing forth your own fruit. You were forever in the shadow of myself and Jesus Christ as he was talking to them. But now that I'm leaving, you will now step into that role too, and you'll do even greater things that I have done. But to do so, you must remain in me. And if you want to know how to do that, says Jesus, the very last line of the passage tells us, keep my commands. And this is my command. Love one another.